Vavi's perspective.
How could things have gone so wrong so fast? After Andrew stepped out to retrieve something from his ship, the rest of us were left to speculate what he was to bring in. Most of the researchers, myself included, were in the nest that he was simply retrieving another blueprint. The other, more conspiratorial ones claimed that he might have been retrieving weapons stored aboard the vehicle. This, however, was nonsense. Our engineers, from my understanding, had searched the vehicle tirelessly for notions of hostility before he even woke up, and they found nothing of the sort. Regardless of our individual suspicions, everything was fine up until the subject of our scrutiny changed from the human to one of our own engineers.
Yisk, what are you doing?
Asked the head engineer, approaching his primarily silent underling as he appeared to be fiddling with the prototype.
Put that down.
He shouted with a surprising degree of anger in his words.
Sorry, sir.
The strange man breathed, rushing to return the item to its case before backpedaling a step as though fearing the harmless man's vicinity.
I was just checking the mechanisms to make sure everything was up to code.
Meeting his excuse with a curious headshake, Eck continued his approach regardless.
Please refrain from doing such without permission.
He chirped gently, watching as his engineer continued to move away from him before finally tripping over his own desk, flinging open a usually locked cabinet and in the process sending its papers flying about the lab. Quickly rushing over to ensure his employee was okay, Eck briefly commanded us all to retrieve the scattered papers, whilst he proceeding, in the poor fellow, back to his claws. The rest us, myself included, dutifully scattered about to recollect the fallen papers, taking extra care to avoid stepping on the potentially important documents. Within mere seconds, the department managed to recollect his papers. Most were immediately deposited back into Yisk's cabinet. Atop my stack of collected papers, however, was something that hadn't belonged in the first place. "Why do you have one of Andrew's blueprints?" I asked him accusatorily, watching as the gaggle of formerly idling researchers looked upon the green paper in my claws and then toward Yisk, whose face now betrayed the beginning of a full-on panic attack as X stood over him. What happened next was a blur. First, the engineering head had begun shouting at Yisk, listing the half-dozen crimes that merely possessing this document could render him liable for. Then, I could only watch as the scolded engineer made a mad dash for the prototype gun, stunning us all upon the realization that the FTL had been loading it prior to this. A realization delivered in the form of a bullet to poor X's chest. Pandemonium erupted within the laboratory as occupants screamed and scrambled to and fro in attempts to get as far away from the gunman as possible. For a moment, I contemplated trying to provide medical attention to Eck. Ultimately, however, I decided against it. Not only was the department's director surely dead before he had even hit the ground, given the prototype's damaging capabilities, but attempting any form of first aid would draw attention to myself and potentially motivate the gunman to make me his next target. Chot, on the other claw, had no such hesitation, lunging for Yisk's weapon and attempting to wrest it from his grip. The spy, however, had other plans, quickly bringing the gun's stock full force into our ambassador's skull and knocking him to the ground with a painful-sounding thud. Fortunately, the commotion caused by this sudden upheaval was enough to draw attention from a pair of guards. Unfortunately, however, their visors weren't rated for this caliber of weapon, resulting in 2 additional fatalities, as the assailant expertly fired upon his slowed attackers with obscene accuracy before bolting past down the hallway. Every second of Yisk's running away dragged out in my head like an eternity compressed as my will screeched at me to give chase, only for a veto from my own self-preservation to still my legs. "He's probably going to the hangar bay," I heard from one of the technicians at my side. Strangely enough, it wasn't until my realization that the human was in danger that my will and my feet finally came to an agreement as I took off down the hall in utter disregard for the calls of my colleagues for me to stop and reconsider. My lungs burned with exhaustion as I sprinted down the hallways, my body all the while attempting fruitlessly to pant. But I couldn't slow down. After all, 1 bullet was all it would take for me to lose the most interesting friend I've ever made. Suddenly, from around the corner, I heard wavering shouts from Yisk about a demon, followed by a pained exclamation from Andrew in his native language.
Sanuva bitch.
Immediately following what may well have been the human's final words, a pair of meaty thuds sounded out as a body first hit the wall before crumbling to the floor. Tears stung at the corner of my eyes as I rounded another bend to see the image that would surely haunt me for years to come. Slumped against the wall opposite to another hallway with his legs pulled close in some twisted facsimile of life, Andrew laid shaking upon the ground. As I approached the body, I noted with disdain the way his chest twitched up and down as though he were still breathing, still alive. "Andrew," I shouted, rushing hopelessly toward him, knowing deep down that I could do nothing to help the alien. The closer I got, however, the more obvious it became that he was still alive. Kneeling down before him and clasping my claws upon his shoulders, I lightly shook the human in an effort to rouse him from the delirium he seemed to be experiencing. "Are you okay?" The human scientist continued his shallow breaths as he raised up his right hand and pointed a finger down the hall he was facing.
I killed him.
At first, I assumed that he was suffering some form of shock-induced hallucination, but glancing to my side down the path untraveled, I discovered for myself the truth to his morbid testament. Sprawled out lifelessly on the once clean metal floor, now painted purple, was the body of Yisk. His skull was visibly fractured in multiple places, as though a high-powered round were fired directly into it. For a moment, I wondered if Andrew had somehow retrieved the prototype and made an experiment of our traitor. However, clutched within his dead claws, the weapon still remained entirely in Yisk's possession. That was when I finally noticed the blood coating Andrew's left hand. And sure enough, looking at the dead spy's wound, the fractures matched up perfectly with the profile of a human fist.
I didn't mean to,
Professed the human, looking down at his blood-soaked hand in terror.
I know he was a spy, but
"Everything is okay," I reassured him, helping the human regain his standing posture just as he had done for me estrius ago back on his ship. "Let's get back to the others for now. They'll probably be..." Only then did I finally notice the countless sets of footsteps cascading toward us from every direction, with only a small minority originating from whence I'd come. Within no more a few moments, soldiers and scientists from every high-clearance department had converged on the violence. "Looks like Andrew found our spy," cheered one of our energy engineers, offering the human a congratulatory bow, which was soon replicated by several others, along with numerous loud congratulations. The human, meanwhile, still appeared to be in shock, reeling from the grim reality of what had just transpired here.
Don't feel bad for him.
Chot coughed from right behind me, startling my feathers to attention as I leapt aside with an involuntary yelp.
That parasite killed Ek.
still,
Began Andrew, breathlessly placing a blood-soaked palm over his chest.
I just killed someone. Holy shit.
What exactly did you use to do him in?
One of the guards asked curiously, surveying the body with morbid intrigue. It was clear, by the way, lingered on individual words, that he was expecting the answer to be a weapon of some form. However, when the human simply raised his blood-soaked hand in reply, he almost looked offended. However, before he could speak up again, another voice from the crowd interrupted, specifically that of the security head. On first glance, the elderly stranger almost appeared senile, with his cloudy eyes and withered crest. However, behind this facade was a professional in his field. Back in his more youthful days, he'd been such an efficient lookout and sniper that Providence soldiers had their own nickname for him, Demon's Right Eye. Now, however, with those days long behind him, the security head spent most of his days surveying the facility's state-of-the-art camera systems.
I didn't see it all exactly.
He admitted, casting his eyes down in shame.
The moment the spy revealed himself, I activated the silent alarm and went to intercept him.
But your cameras do record the past 2 segments of footage, do they not?
Inquired Chot in a tone that told everyone he already knew the answer.
They do indeed.
Miss Vavi, please escort Mr. Andrew back to his suite and join us in the security office to review the footage. Me and Demon Eye over here will be waiting.
I nodded obediently and took my human's hand before gently beginning to guide him back toward his cell.
I'm gonna need some time to process that.
He confessed drearily, refusing to look me in the eyes as he followed along without issue. At the very least, the fact that I could now comprehend without issue his native tongue was a marked improvement even over a few days ago.
Do you think maybe I can wait until tomorrow to demonstrate my design?
I doubt Chot will have many complaints. I replied, approaching the cell door and opening it to allow my friend inside. I'll talk him into it, so do not worry about that. Andrew didn't say another word, slinking defeatedly into his quarters and not even bothering to wave goodbye as I eased shut the door behind him. The security room fortunately wasn't far from the prisoner's quarters. After a short walk, I was able to rather easily invite myself in to find Chot and the security head anxiously awaiting my presence.
Come on now.
The old man beckoned, tapping at a cushion placed beside his own in a position optimized for viewing his wall of security monitors.
Chot wanted you here for our first viewing. Says your biology know-how could help the interpretation.
No sooner had I sat down than did Chot lean forward onto the keyboard in front of Demon Eye and, caring not for the owner's permission, press the play button. The three of us watched in syrupy thick silence as the moments leading up to Yiska's death crawled past in excruciating detail. First, we saw Ek die, then those two guards, then the spy running down our halls from sightline to sightline. Finally, we reached the point where the spy confronted our alien friend. The three of us watched in confusion as the prototype was lined up against Andrew's forehead and fired. Clearly, given the human's pained reaction of grabbing at his temple, the bullet had hit its mark. However, whereas for Ek such an injury was fatal, Andrew seemed little more than inconvenienced by it. Our confusion, however, quickly gave way to shock, awe, and mild fear as we watched the human reflexively swing his fist into the couple's skull, sending him careening on a head-first collision with the nearby wall. Yisk was dead before he hit the ground.
Thank you for watching. Like, share and subscribe for more original content. New chapters and standalone stories uploaded weekly.